began after the fever. Not a high fever, not the kind that makes your body shake or your vision blur, but a quiet, lingering heat that settled beneath your skin like something breathing slowly inside your bones. It came and went over 2 days, left your mouth dry, your dreams long and sticky with strange faces. When it broke, you thought it was over. You thought you'd simply sweat out whatever sickness had passed through you, but then you saw the mark. It wasn't there the night before, you were sure of it. You would have noticed a line that deliberate, that sharp. It started just below the wrist, a narrow streak of violet that ran halfway to your elbow, not raised, not inflamed, just there. Like someone had drawn it on with a finger dipped in dusk. You touched it, expecting pain, but it didn't hurt, didn't itch, didn't move, only sat beneath the skin, perfectly still, like it had always been waiting to be revealed. You tried to scrub it off, nothing, cold water, soap, a bit of your father's old antiseptic, still nothing. The mark remained soft and stubborn. You stared at it for long minutes, heart beating louder than it should have. There was something in the way it curved slightly toward the bone, like it followed a path older than your body. You didn't tell your father, he wouldn't have listened. You told no one, in fact, except for her. Malin, the village healer. She lived at the edge of the woods, where the moss was thicker and the crows louder. People came to her when medicine failed, when doctors from the city shrugged and muttered Latin and sent you home with nothing but a bottle and a prayer. She was the one who healed your mother years ago when the sickness turned her skin yellow and her voice into wind. You hadn't seen Malin in a long time, but your feet took you there anyway. Her cottage hadn't changed. Same red cloth hung over the doorway, same bundles of herbs drying beneath the eaves. When she opened the door, she didn't ask what brought you. She looked at you, at your face, then your arms, and her lips curved faintly. "You saw it, didn't you?" You said nothing, just rolled up your sleeve and held your arm out like a question. Malin stepped forward, took your hand in hers. Her fingers were cold. She turned your wrist gently, tracing the mark with her thumb. "Not in examination, not in worry, in reverence. It's not an illness, child," she said. Then she smiled, not kindly but knowingly. "It's the first sign." You opened your mouth to speak, to ask what it was a sign of, what it meant. Why it was you, but Malin only let go of your hand, turned her back, and began boiling water. "You've been chosen," she said, as casually as one might comment on the weather, and over the sound of the kettle beginning to hiss, she added, "Best not fight it, grace doesn't come twice." You stood in the doorway, the mark on your skin colder than her hands, and wondered what it meant to be chosen when you had never asked to be. And why, deep down, a part of you already knew this wasn't the last mark. The strange thing wasn't that Malin believed it was grace, it was that everyone else did too. You told yourself you weren't going to mention it. That you'd keep the mark hidden beneath sleeves in silence, pretend you were still whole, still untouched. But that same evening when you walked through the village square, the butcher's wife, Marta, stopped mid-sentence as you passed, her eyes drifting from your face to your wrist, as if she could see it through the fabric. She didn't gasp, she didn't ask questions, she just smiled, not wide, not cruel, just a quiet, understanding smile, the kind people give mourners when they no longer need to ask who died. "Your time's come then," she said softly. And she touched your shoulder in a way that felt too familiar, too ritualistic, like she was sealing a truth you hadn't yet spoken aloud. You didn't respond, but that night, in the dim light of your bedroom, you lay awake thinking of the way her fingers pressed into your shoulder. Of how gently she said your time, as if this mark was not a curse but a rite of passage, as if everyone had been waiting for this to happen to you, as if it was inevitable. Over the next few days you noticed them, the others. Small glimpses at first, a boy with a pale spiral under his left eye, the baker with a thin scar that traced the back of his neck like a riverbed. Even the priest, Father Kellen, had something just beneath his collar, a dark crescent where skin met robe. You began to wonder how long it had been this way, how many of them bore marks, and why no one ever spoke of them until now. You tried asking your father, sitting across from him at breakfast as he buttered bread without meeting your gaze. You cleared your throat, said something vague, "Have you ever had something appear on your skin?" He paused just for a second, then continued spreading the butter with deliberate calm. "When I was your age," he said, "my father took me to Malin too, don't worry." He didn't look up, "You'll get used to it." The way he said it, like talking about puberty, or losing teeth, or seeing your first frost, made your stomach turn. What disturbed you wasn't that he knew, it was that he had never told you, that all these years in this small village where nothing escaped gossip, no one had ever whispered about the marks, no one had warned you. And now suddenly everyone spoke with the same hush of reverence and routine, as if the mark had rewritten your role in the village overnight, as if you were no longer one of them, but something they could now finally welcome. And yet with every passing day, you felt the opposite. Not welcome, but watched by the shopkeeper who lingered too long in your direction, by the old woman who muttered something beneath her breath and clutched her chest as you passed, by the children who no longer played near your door. Their gazes held no hatred, but they held something worse, expectation, and beneath your skin the mark began to itch, not in pain, but like something just beneath it wanted out. Like it knew more was coming, and it was already preparing your body to receive it. It appeared 4 days later. You had just stepped out of the bath. Steam curled against the mirror, blurring your reflection into a ghost, a soft outline, eyes hollowed by condensation. You turned your back to wipe the glass, and in the brief, breathless moment before your image reappeared, you felt it. Not pain, not a sting, something subtler, a tension beneath the shoulder blade. A pulse slow and warm like a heartbeat misplaced. You dropped the towel and twisted toward the mirror, and there it was, the second mark. It was larger than the first, not a line this time, but a shape, almost geometric. A soft, dark curve forming the beginning of a spiral etched just below your left shoulder, as if the skin had been kissed by shadow and sealed with ink no one else could use. The edges were precise, sharp, not like bruising. Not like disease, it looked deliberate, like a symbol. Your breath caught. You touched it gently, expecting the familiar neutrality of skin. But beneath your fingers the mark was warm, not fever warm, not surface warm. It radiated. Like it had depth, as if it went further than the flesh allowed, as if the skin was only the beginning and something deeper beneath had responded to your touch. The sensation sent a chill through your arms. You didn't scream, you didn't cry. But something inside you shifted, a deep, slow recognition that this wasn't a random mutation or an infection. This was a process. You didn't go to mail-in immediately, not this time. Instead, you stayed in your room, seated on the edge of the bed with your arms wrapped tightly around your knees, staring at the same blank patch of wall you had stared at since you were a child. But now the room felt different, smaller. More aware of you than you were of it. The silence pressed in, not comforting but intimate, almost reverent, like it was waiting for something to finish unfolding. By nightfall, the mark throbbed in rhythm with your heartbeat. You could feel it even when you weren't touching it, a steady hum like the vibration of a tuning fork struck just below hearing. You dreamt that night, though it didn't feel like a dream. You were standing at the edge of a shallow river. The water ran black and slow, full of pale hands reaching upward from beneath the surface. On the other side, figures knelt in the dirt, their faces turned skyward, mouths open but making no sound. They were covered in marks, glowing. Pulsing in time with yours, you tried to call out, but your voice was gone, and when you looked down, your hands were no longer your own. They were branded, marked to the fingertips, and your arms moved not by will, but by something older that had finally remembered your shape. You woke up gasping. The room was still. The mark was burning not with fire, but with certainty. By morning, you were at Malin's door again. She opened it before you knocked, as if she'd known. She didn't ask to see it. She just stepped aside and let you in. "You've reached the second gate," she said quietly, placing a cup of something dark and bitter into your hands. You didn't drink. You just stared at her, voice hoarse. "What's happening to me?" Malin sat down across from you, her eyes soft but unreadable. "It's not happening to you," she said. "It's happening through you." That was the moment something cracked, not in your skin, not in your body, in your trust. Because for the first time you realized she wasn't treating this as a symptom. She was guiding it. She wasn't trying to stop the marks. She was waiting for the next one, and maybe so were you. At first, the dreams came in fragments. They didn't arrive like normal dreams do, slipping into your mind after a long day, abstract and confused. These came like memories from a life you didn't remember living. They were too vivid, too exact. You didn't float through them. You walked, you breathed, you heard. The first began in a field, a vast, golden plain under a sun that never moved. All around you, people knelt, hundreds of them, robed in shades of ash and ivory, their heads bowed to the dirt, foreheads pressing into cracked earth that whispered with voices beneath it. You didn't recognize them, but they recognized you. They didn't speak, they listened. And somehow you knew it was you they were listening to, though you said nothing. Then the field disappeared. Replaced by a dark well, circular, impossibly wide, lined with stone that pulsed like it was made of flesh instead of rock. You stood at the edge. You didn't fall. You stepped in, willingly, calmly. As if answering a call you'd been ignoring your entire life. You fell for a long time, but you weren't afraid. You were home. The second dream came 2 nights later. You were in a house, but not the one you lived in. Its walls were made of salt, the floor a tapestry of human hair woven so tightly it shimmered when the wind passed through. A woman sat in the center of the room, her back to you, her spine arched unnaturally, like it had been growing roots. She turned her head only slightly, enough to reveal a mouth where her ear should have been, and that mouth whispered, "He's remembering himself through you." You woke up drenched in sweat, the sheets twisted around your limbs like bindings. The mark on your shoulder throbbed beneath the fabric. It had darkened, sharpened. A new curve had formed overnight, curling inward like a question you weren't ready to answer. By the fourth dream, you stopped calling them dreams. Because you begun to recognize pieces of them in the waking world. A tree in the woods with bark that peeled like skin, the same tree you saw burning, slowly and without fire in the second dream. The face of a child in the crowd at the market, a face you'd seen before, pressed against the inside of a tower window, silently mouthing your name. And most of all, the language. You began to hear it in your sleep. A tongue older than sound, spoken not with mouths but with the spaces between breath. You couldn't translate it, but you understood it, not word by word, but as meaning. It came with sensation, with visions. With memory that didn't belong to you, and yet lived in your bones like it had always been there. One night, as you stood in the hallway between sleep and waking, you caught your reflection in the window. You weren't asleep. But your eyes were open too wide, too still, and your lips moved on their own. You were speaking the language, not aloud, but into the glass, as if someone or something was listening from the other side. The next morning, the third mark bloomed across the back of your hand. It pulsed faintly, a rhythm not unlike your own heartbeat, but slower, older, like something buried deep inside you had finally begun to stir. And when you showed it to Malin, she didn't react with surprise. She only bowed her head slightly, placed her hand over her heart, and whispered, "He dreams through you now." You didn't ask who he was, you already knew. They didn't summon you. No letter was slipped beneath your door. No knock came in the night. No voices whispered your name beneath your window. And yet, when dusk fell on the 12th day, you found yourself walking toward the edge of the village, toward the house made of stone and silence that sat alone near the tree line, where the shadows lingered longer and the birds refused to land. You hadn't been there since childhood. It wasn't a place people visited unless they were brought, and even then no one ever spoke of what happened inside, just that those who entered came out, quieter, more certain, or didn't come out at all. As you walked, you noticed the lanterns were already lit along the path. Each one flickered the same color, a pale orange that hummed softly, not like fire but like breath. They lit your way, even though the sun hadn't fully set. The sky was still purple, the wind oddly still. You didn't feel afraid, not in the way fear usually arrives. This was something else deeper, older, a stillness in your blood, a knowledge that your feet were walking a path someone else had once walked. That your shadow no longer belonged only to you. When you reached the stone house, the door was open. They were already waiting, not many, only a dozen or so. Men, women, elders, children. All dressed plainly, barefoot on the cold stone floor. None of them spoke, none of them needed to. You recognized them all, neighbors, the man who sold you salt, the woman who helped you fix your gate, the girl who had watched you from the well with eyes too dark for her age, all of them marked. Some bore theirs openly, symbols glowing faintly across the forehead or neck, illuminated as if from beneath. Others you could not see, but you knew. You felt the patterns etched into their bodies, resonating against yours like tuning forks in a shared silence. Malin stood at the center of the room, beside a low table carved from a single slab of bone-colored wood. She didn't smile, but she nodded when your eyes met hers. "Come," she said softly, "place your hand." There was no question in her voice, no gentleness, just certainty. On the table lay a circular plaque covered in symbols, curved, spiraled, ancient-looking. You recognized none of them individually, but somehow the whole shape mirrored the third mark now blooming across your shoulder blade. Your fingers trembled as you stepped forward. You looked around the room, hoping someone might meet your eyes. Offer some warmth, some protest, but they all stood still, not cold, not cruel, simply waiting, expectant. You paused, then you placed your hand flat against the plaque. It was warm. Immediately a hum filled the room, not sound, resonance. Like your heartbeat had been caught and echoed back at you through 1,000 others. The marks on your skin flared not with pain, but with recognition, as if the symbols were greeting each other. As if they were never separate, only scattered, waiting to be brought together again. Then for the first time a voice, not from Malin, not from the others, from somewhere below, beneath the stone, beneath your feet. It spoke inside you, a vibration in the spine. "Now we remember." The room didn't change, but you did, because in that moment, as the echo faded and your hand lifted from the plaque, you realized something that tightened your chest and stilled your breath. You had not been brought here, you had always been meant to come, and the marks on their skin, they weren't decorations, they were maps, and yours had just begun to open. You left the stone house before dawn, barefoot, breath shallow, skin still tingling from where your hand had touched the plaque. No one stopped you, no one followed. Malin only watched you walk away, her expression unreadable, not disappointment, not anger, but something worse. Understanding, like she had seen this before, like she already knew where you were going and how it would end. The cold bit at your skin as you fled down the narrow path, past the field, past the fence where the birch trees bent low like mourners. You didn't run, running would have made it feel like escape was possible. Instead, you walked fast, teeth clenched, every muscle wound tight with the tension of someone trying to outrun a shadow that had already taken root inside them. You didn't know where you were going, only that you needed to be somewhere else, anywhere but here, anywhere but with them. You reached the river by mid-morning, the same river you bathed in as a child, the same waters that once felt sacred, now reflecting back a face you barely recognized. You knelt by the edge, dipped your hands into the current, and scrubbed, hard, desperate. You clawed at the marks, nails scraping skin, hoping they were still surface level, that they were ink or dirt or something you could undo with enough force. But they didn't bleed, they didn't fade. They only pulsed slow, patient, as if amused by your denial. That night you slept in the hollow of an old tree. The wind howled through the forest, but inside it was quiet, too quiet. You thought maybe distance would dull the dreams. Maybe the farther you went, the less you'd hear that voice beneath your ribs, the one that called itself memory. But the dreams didn't stop, they deepened. Now they came while you were awake, visions that cracked the edge of reality, showing you moments that hadn't happened yet or had, just not to you. You saw children born with open eyes and no tongues. You saw towers made of bone. You saw your own hands drenched in light that burned like fire but left no ash. You woke screaming. The forest didn't answer. By the third day, your body began to change. It started with the warmth in your palms, constant, like holding a coal that never burned. Then came the hunger, not for food, but for sound. You found yourself drawn to echoes, to birdsong, to the thrum of insects in the grass. You began humming without realizing, old melodies in languages you didn't know. And worst of all, you could feel them, the others, even from miles away. Their presence whispered across the air like scent, like static. You knew which ones were sleeping, which ones were watching, which ones had already crossed the line you were still pretending to avoid. You tried to return home, just to your cottage, just to find your father. But when you reached the village's edge, your feet refused to move forward. Something inside you recoiled, not out of fear, but reverence, as if you no longer belonged among the unmarked, as if setting foot there would somehow corrupt them, or you. You spent the next night in silence, curled beneath the roots of a hill. The sky above was full of stars, and yet you felt utterly alone. Not forgotten, no, that would have been mercy. You felt remembered. Like something vast and ancient had finally opened its eyes and was now watching you, not with love, not with hate, but with ownership. And as you stared into the dark, the realization hit you, not all at once, but slow, like frost climbing up a window pane. You were not running away, you were being led. Every step, every refusal, every moment of doubt, they were part of it. The resistance itself was anticipated, expected, even designed, and you'd walk the path exactly as they wanted. The only difference now was that you finally saw it, and the worst part, a small part of you buried deep, nearly silent, was grateful. You did not walk back as yourself, not entirely. It had been 13 days since the ritual, and somewhere in the blur of trees and dirt and dreams, something inside you had shifted from resisting to listening. You told yourself you were returning for answers. That you needed to confront Malin, demand the truth of what they'd done to you. But even that excuse had begun to sound thin, like cloth stretched over a wound too wide to hide. You weren't walking because you chose to, you were walking because your bones remembered something your mind refused to name. The village did not look different. Same crooked fences, same sagging roofs, same smoke curling lazily from chimneys as if nothing had changed. And yet everything had. The moment your boots touched the outer road, the wind stilled, birds fell silent. The goats grazing by the well turned their heads, and for a split second, even they seemed to understand that something had returned, something old, something not entirely human anymore. No one greeted you, they saw you though, faces peeked out from shutters. A child clutched their mother's skirts. A man you once shared bread with gripped the handle of his axe tighter as you passed, but no one spoke, no one dared. They didn't know what you were now, and neither did you. That was the most terrifying part. You made your way to the healer's house with the weight of 50 stairs pressed into your back. Malin was waiting at the door as if she had never moved since the night you left. Her face was unchanged, but her eyes were softer, not with pity, not even with welcome, but with acknowledgement. Like she had been watching a sapling bend through winter and now stood witnessing the first bud of something inevitable. "You came back," she said. "I didn't mean to," you replied. She didn't answer, only stepped aside, letting you in. The house was as you remembered, dim, smelling of sage and tallow. Dried herbs hung from the beams like silent sentinels. The bonewood plaque was gone, replaced by a shallow basin of dark water. Malin gestured to it. "You should look." You didn't want to, you had been seeing too much lately, visions in puddles, faces in tree bark, voices layered beneath your own thoughts, but your feet moved anyway. You knelt beside the basin and looked. The surface rippled once. Then it showed you not yourself, but all of them, the marked, not just in your village, but scattered across the mountains, the valleys, the salt plains, hundreds, thousands. A web of them, thin threads glowing between their hearts, pulsing toward something central, toward a core. And then, for one breathless moment, you were the core. You felt their pain, their power, their hunger. You felt the echo of births and deaths, of oaths made in salt and sealed in blood. You felt time folding inward, centuries collapsing like pages turning too fast to read. And above it all, you heard a voice, your voice, older and fuller and laced with something not entirely mortal, whisper, "We are not many, we are one, and we have always been coming back." The water went still, you fell backward, gasping. Your skin burned with memory, not flame. The marks along your spine thrummed like living ink. You looked up at Malin, but she wasn't watching the basin, she was watching you. "You're ready," she said. "For what?" you whispered. "To choose." Her hand extended, not a demand, not an order, an offering. Return meant one thing, alignment, to step into the role that had been waiting for you before you were born. But now she offered a branch in the path. To ascend or to break away entirely, neither came without cost. You stared at her hand for a long time, and somewhere inside the question repeated, were you still choosing, or was this too part of the script written in your skin? The room seemed smaller now, not in size but in containment, as if the air itself recognized the gravity of what was unfolding and was bracing for a shift too heavy for language. Malin's outstretched hand remained suspended in the stillness between you, her fingers neither beckoning nor retreating, a gesture that held no persuasion, only acceptance, and yet it weighed more than any command. You didn't take it, not yet. Because some part of you, some thread of old instinct still tangled in your ribs, wanted to scream, to run, to unmake the path you had been sleepwalking down. You thought of your father's voice, the creak of the porch swing, the feel of dirt under your nails after planting season. You thought of the you before the marks, before the night the dreams changed, but memory could not anchor you anymore. The past had begun to flicker, its edges blurry, its colors too soft. Your name, once solid on your tongue, now felt like a shape rather than a truth. Still, you whispered it aloud, just to see if it would echo. It didn't. Instead, the water in the basin darkened, swallowing its own reflection. From the base of your skull to the center of your palms, a low hum began to vibrate, familiar now, the sound of something waking or remembering. Malin stepped back, she did not speak again. The silence told you everything. This part was yours alone. You placed your hands into the basin. It was not water, not exactly. It was colder than stone, thicker than ink, but it did not wet your skin. It clung, crawled. Seeped into your pores with a patience that felt like worship. It entered you not through pressure, but recognition, as if it had always been waiting for your return. And as the liquid climbed up your arms, so too did the memories that were not yours. You saw cities burning without fire. You saw a mouth stitched shut in a cradle of gold. You saw a mark identical to yours, etched into the back of a woman with eyes like yours, standing before a stone gate that bled. You screamed then. Or maybe not, your mouth opened, but no sound came. Instead, you felt the sound vibrating through your bones, echoing in your teeth, until even your breath was shaped by it. This was no ordinary choosing. It was a binding. A grafting of self onto a design older than scripture, deeper than blood. And then came the final moment. You were asked, not with words, but with knowing. A presence, vast and without form, entered the chamber of your heart and pressed gently against the last shred of resistance left in you. The question was simple, the answer would not be, will you carry it? You thought of running, you thought of kneeling, but what you did in the end was neither. You stood, not taller, not braver, but aligned. You turned to Malin. And though no voice passed your lips, she nodded once. "It is done," she said softly, but the truth pressed deeper. No, it had only just begun. You returned as if walking through someone else's dream. The path to the village was the same, but the colors were off, too vivid, too still. Trees held their breath longer. Leaves no longer rustled, they listened. The ground didn't crunch beneath your feet, it received you. Somewhere behind your ribs, the hum remained, like an ember that refused to die out. A pulse that no longer beat in rhythm with your heart, but in rhythm with something deeper. At the edge of the village, the wind did not greet you. No one did. Yet you knew they had seen you. Doors closed quietly, not slammed but sealed. Curtains drew themselves without hands, and still you walked on, not because you wanted to prove something, but because the walking was part of the return. You were retracing steps not just from memory, but from a cycle older than choice. The child by the well dropped their pail when they saw you. The clang of metal on stone echoed louder than it should have, like the village itself had flinched. You didn't move toward them, you didn't need to. They were already backing away, wide-eyed, whispering something you couldn't hear. You thought you would feel anger or sorrow, but what stirred inside was nothing, not numbness, not peace, just space. Like your insides had been cleared out to make room for something vast and wordless. At your old home, the door was ajar. Inside, it was as you'd left it, except the herbs on the shelf had shriveled, and the mirror on the wall was covered with cloth. As if the house had sensed what was coming, as if it had prepared itself to house a stranger. You sat, and the silence sat with you, but it didn't last. That night, as the moon climbed high, there came a knock, not on your door, but in your mind. A memory not quite yours unfurled behind your eyes. A fire, a woman marked like you, a circle of villagers shouting one word again and again, witch. You opened your eyes, your breath was shallow. The marks on your body were glowing again. Faint rhythmic outside, something moved in the trees. You stood, heart steady, body hollow, and for the first time you whispered a truth that was not taught but inherited. They don't fear what I've become, they fear what I remember. Because deep beneath their rituals, their prayers, their trembling hands, they knew. You were not the first to return, and you would not be the last. The wind carried voices that night. They didn't speak in words, not as language knows them. It was more like the hush of breath before lightning strikes, or the moment the sea retreats just before a wave devours the shore. You stood at your doorway, barefoot, skin bare to the cold, and listened to the sound of fear blooming across a village that had once called you kin. They had gathered again, this time not at the church, nor at the healer's house, but at the edge of the fields, where torches painted trembling halos into the dark and shadows of pitchforks quivered like uncertain convictions. You saw their faces, some you had delivered as infants, others had once pressed a coin into your hand with grateful tears. Now those same hands clutched prayer beads, stones, salt. They did not speak your name, but their silence aimed like a spear. You stepped into the night, the earth cool beneath your heels. Your footsteps left no prints. The marks on your back had begun to rise, not glowing but shifting, like ink waking beneath skin. They were not merely symbols, they were maps. Gateways, you understood that now, and as you walked, memory peeled open like pages set aflame. You remembered the woman at the stake. You remembered the breath of the child who healed in your arms. You remembered the song your grandmother sang in a tongue older than dust. You remembered how you died once and how they buried you beneath stones too heavy to move. And yet you stood here now, again, not by resurrection, but by inheritance. By grace they had called it, but grace, you now knew, was never gentle. It was not mercy, it was claim. The villagers flinched as you approached. Not one raised a weapon, not one spoke. It was the stillness of prey who know the predator has not come to feed, but to choose. You raised your hand, and from your palm a light not bright, not holy, honest, pulsed once, like the memory of a heartbeat long buried. No one screamed, but one by one they knelt, not in worship, in surrender, not to you, to the truth, that the line had never broken, that the old ways, the old knowing, the old grace had simply waited. In you it had found a voice again. And as you stood beneath the watching stars, no longer woman, no longer exile, no longer name, only vessel, you spoke 3 words: let it begin. Not revenge, not mercy, just a restoration of the forgotten. The torch flames stilled, the wind sighed, and somewhere far below the earth something woke. The marks on your skin would never fade, but now the world would learn to read them.